Welcome back. In today's lesson, we are going to talk about variables, and we will mention constants as well and the difference. So first, a variable is simply a way to store information to be used throughout the program. So think of a variable like a box. A box can hold any number of things, just like a variable can hold any number of things. However, if we look at this box, we have no idea what's in it. If it were closed, right now we can see it's empty, but if it were closed, we have no idea what's in it. If we had a storeroom full of boxes and none of them had labels, well, that would be a problem. We wouldn't be able to find it. So when we create a variable, we give it a descriptive name. Just like if you had a storeroom full of boxes, you would put labels on them to make it easy to find. So in JavaScript, we use the keyword var to create a variable. So here I have var address. Now this is an empty variable. We have not added anything into that variable yet. We're not storing anything there, but we have created a variable. Just like here, I have an empty box with a label, so we know what's should be put into that. Now, I will say, and this is for a later discussion, I could store a phone number in this variable. The computer is not going to care. The address is for the name address is for our purposes. And I could call this variable XYZ. Means nothing to me, means nothing to the computer. The computer would treat it the same, computer would be fine. But if we want to validate the information, put the right information, or make sure the right information is being put in, then we as the programmer have to make sure that that happens. But once again, the reason we give them descriptive names is not for the computer, but for us as the programmer, just to make it a whole lot easier to read our code. So I've created a variable named address, which should obviously store addresses. Now, before I get into how to add information and store that information, I do want to mention right now that there are two new keywords here, let and const, that just came out with the latest release of JavaScript. I'm not going to talk about those right now. We need to learn a couple other things before we really fully understand the difference between these and var and how it impacts our programs. So I will talk about these in another lesson, but for right now just know that they do exist and we will be talking about them. But for now we're going to use var. So var address equals 300 Martinsburg Road. That is how I add information into my variable. We use what's known as the assignment operator, or the equal sign is what you've probably always called it before, because that's what it's used for in math. But I will mention right now that the single equal sign is not how we compare two things. We would not say does 5 equal 5 using a single equal sign. We would actually use a double equals or triple equals, but once again, that's another lesson. The single equals in programming languages and in JavaScript is the assignment operator. It's how we assign information to the variable. So I have var address declaring my variable name equals, and then the information I'm storing in there. And you can see that in the picture here as well, that it's being put into the box. So what's happening when we create the variable and we store information in that variable? What's happening when we create the variable is it creates a little space in our system memory, and if we just do an empty variable like I did with var address, it's an empty space in the memory set aside to be used later to store that information. And then anytime we reference address, it goes and looks at that spot in the system memory to see what's stored in there. Once I added 300 Martinsburg Road to that, it put that into that empty spot in the memory and is storing it. And that will stay in the system memory for as long as our program is running, or until we as the programmer decide to remove that from the system memory. And then just a quick explanation of the difference between variable and constant. Think of a constant like the weight of a product. Let's say we are selling our world famous chocolate and we sell it in boxes that are 1 pound or 2.2 kilograms. Well, it does not matter how many boxes somebody buys, the weight of each individual box will not change. They're always going to be 1 pound or 2.2 kilograms. However, the number of boxes somebody orders could change. One person might order 1 box, another person might order 25 boxes. That would be a variable. So that is the difference between a constant and a variable. So in our programming, we want to differentiate between the two because we want to make sure that our constants are not accidentally changing. We wouldn't want the program to accidentally change the weight of our box to 5 pounds, because then when we go to calculate the shipping cost, it's going to drastically change that cost. We can use the var keyword for both of these, and that's the way it has been done in the past. However, you may have guessed from our two new keywords that I just showed you, let and const. Const is actually what we will start using to create those constants. But once again, that is for another lesson. For now, let's jump over to brackets and let's create some variables and learn how to use them in our program. Okay, here I am back in brackets, and I am using the same file that we had started in our previous project, our first code. So you can see here we have the document.write hello world. I'm simply outputting hello world to our document. So instead of putting this all in one statement, let's add this to a variable and then output the variable. So I'm going to say var, and I'm just going to do txt because it is our text, so var txt. This creates a txt variable. Now I could go down another line and add it, or I can add information to it right within this first line. So I'm just going to go and do it right here. Var txt, var text equals hello world. And just to make sure that I am getting a different hello world, I'm going to do an exclamation mark here to make it a little bit different than this one. And then I'm going to come down here and get rid of hello world, and instead of outputting hello world, I'm going to output txt. Okay, so let's save this and see what happens. And there we go. I can see I now have an exclamation mark. It has now outputted the value of my txt variable. So I created a variable called txt. It created space in my system memory, and then I added hello world to it, and then it stored that in the system memory as well. And then when I referenced it right here, the program goes, looks in the memory, and says, oh, okay, we have hello world in there, so that's what I'm going to display and write to the screen. Now, why didn't I put quotes around this? Well, if I put quotes around it, what do you think is going to happen? Well, I'm going to save this, and this is what happens. When I place quotes around something, it treats it like a string. When I don't put quotes around it, it is looking to see if there's a variable with that name. So this is looking for a variable. With the quotes, it's just treating it like a string. It says, okay, I'm supposed to write txt to the screen. It does not recognize it as a variable. So make sure you understand that difference. That is very important, the difference between when to use the quotes and when not to. Had I done something like this in my earlier example, where I just did hello world with no quotes, what do you think that's going to do? Well, if I save this, nothing is showing up, and if I go look at my developer tools, I'm going to see in my console that I have an error. I have an uncaught syntax error. Something's missing here after the argument list on line 3. Well, if I look at line 3, sure enough, this is where my error is. Since I don't have quotes around this program is looking for a variable named hello world. Well, I don't have a variable named hello world. The only variable I have is txt, and that is why I am getting this error. So this is how you would create variables and use them in JavaScript.